Hello everyone, my name is Eugene Park and I'm an associate professor at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, where I teach at the graphic design program. So today I'll be showing you how we can create augmented reality experiences using Spark AR. Now, this was supposed to be a live in-person workshop at the UCDA Education Summit, but due to current circumstances, all of that has moved online. So in this video, I'll be giving you a straight up software demonstration that will show you how to set up Spark AR, but also to use it to create facial filters, do some fixed target tracking, add some interactivity, and then we'll end with a few concluding remarks. Now, as all of you may already know, augmented reality, or AR for short, is an immersive medium in which information or graphics are added into the real physical world. And we see this being done in many different instances, from watching the first down line in NFL games through our TV sets, to catching our favorite Pokemon in our smartphones, to going furniture shopping in the IKEA app. So augmented reality has been around us for quite some time. And recently, one of the more popular forms of AR experiences happens to be things like this, which are facial filters that allows facial tracking to overlay two-dimensional and three-dimensional graphics on our faces. And things like this are already being done in apps like Warby Parker, in which customers can try on glasses digitally even before ordering them. And we also see facial filters being done in popular social media apps like Snapchat, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, there are many ways in which we can create augmented reality experiences, but Spark AR is one of the more accessible and versatile tools that are out there. For one, it has some advanced features that many different AR apps don't allow. But it's also the official tool that Facebook uses to create their own facial filters, including the ones that we see on Instagram. So we're going to start by getting Spark AR set up, and then we're going to use it to create our very first facial filter. So the first thing that we're going to do is to download and install Spark AR. Now to do this, we're simply going to open up a web browser and type in the following address, sparkar.facebook.com. And when you arrive at the web page, you can simply look for the download button on the top right corner of the website. And then once you downloaded the file, you can go through the installation procedures, which should be pretty straightforward, and then you'll be all good to go. When you start Spark AR for the first time, it'll prompt you to log into the app using a Facebook account. Hopefully, this will not be an issue for you, but if you plan to use Spark AR as a class assignment or project, obviously we shouldn't assume that all of our students have Facebook accounts. Now for those students, I basically have a dummy Facebook account ready to go that a student can use to log into the app. And since Spark AR actually allows for multiple device logins, several students can use the same credentials to gain access to the app. And once everybody is logged in, we are now ready to use Spark AR. When we see the starting screen for the first time, you'll realize that we have many different options to choose from. Perhaps the one that stands out the most are these different templates that we can use to quickly generate specific AR features with relative ease. But for us, we're actually going to start off with a blank project because it's easier to explain the fundamentals of the program from a clean slate. So let's click on Blank Project, and that'll take us to the full workspace of Spark AR. Now, before we get to do anything here, the first thing that we're going to do is to create and import the facial graphics that we're going to use to create our facial filter. Now, there are many different ways that we can do this, but the best approach, I think, for first-time users is to download a face reference asset that will serve as a template to create our facial graphics. To do that, we're going to go to Help on the top menu bar, and then we're going to click on Download Face Assets. And when you click on that, that's going to take you to a web page that looks just like this. And all you got to do is click this link right here, download the face reference assets here, and then that would provide you with a file that comes with two main folders. The one that we're looking for here is textures. So when we click on that, and this will give us a couple of image files. And the ones that we need are these two here. Now, before I get to open them up, I do want to preface this by saying that these images are going to look pretty weird and maybe even downright creepy. And that is because these face reference assets are basically projections of the human face on a two-dimensional plane, which explains why these faces looked kind of deformed, spread out, and just downright creepy. So this one here is supposed to represent more of a masculine face. And then here is supposed to be a face that resembles a female face. Now you can open up either of these images, but for me, I'm going to open up the face masculine JPEG in Photoshop, like so. And then from here, we are now ready to create our first facial graphics. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. And it's in this new layer where we're going to create our facial graphics. Now I'm going to keep things simple. I'm going to use the brush tool to quickly generate some graphics. Now, if you're following along, feel free to go as crazy as you'd like, but I'm going to stop here for the sake of time. And when I'm done, I'm going to delete the background layer. And then I'm going to export the remaining graphics into a PNG. So I'm going to do a quick export as PNG. I'm going to name my file. And then I'm also going to create a black and white version of the same graphic. And I'm also going to export that as a PNG. And I'm going to rename this as Face Paint Gray. And then now that we've generated our graphics, now we can go back to Spark AR, and then we can finally put together our facial filter. Switching over to Spark AR, now we can finally acquaint ourselves with the interface of this software. Now, the first thing that I want to point out is this preview window that we see right here. And then basically the preview is set to an iPhone 8, but we can always click on that and then change it to a specific device that we want to preview our AR experience on. And that would adjust the dimensions of the window that's going to be proportional to the aspect ratio of that device. We can also go to the side toolbar and then click on video. And then that would allow us to cycle through different pre-recorded videos of different individuals that are making the exact same head motions and facial expressions. And you can kind of tell that Spark AR has done a good job in bringing different people with different features so that we can now test our AR experience in different instances. And at any time, you can always hit the pause button so that we can better examine an AR graphic at a specific time and angle. And then you can always resume that video to play. And then also, you can also enable your webcam to see what your AR experience is going to look like on you. Now, for some reason, when you enable your webcam, and if the video quality looks pixelated or blurred out, or the colors seems to be way off, you can always click on the restart button, and that is going to reestablish the webcam connection to Spark AR. And that usually does a good job in fixing any issue that you might have. Now that's been explained, we are now going to go to the Assets panel, where we're going to import those two PNG files that we've created on Photoshop. So I'm going to click on Import from Computer, and then I'm going to select the two PNG files, click Open, and now our facial graphics have been loaded. Now, depending on the size of your file, usually it will take a little bit of waiting for these assets to fully load. But in this case, they were very quick. Next, we're going to go into the Scenes panel. And the Scenes panel, you can think of it as like the list of critical components that makes our AR experience possible. Everything from like the device, and every device has a camera, and every camera has a focal point, and so on. So basically, any advanced features that you want to add in Spark AR, it almost always starts right here. So I'm going to add a new feature to our Spark AR experience. So I'm going to click on Add Object, and I'm going to select Face Tracker, which is going to be the feature that we're going to use to enable our facial filters. So I'm going to click Insert, and I'm going to close that. So I can tell that the face tracker is now enabled because when I look at the staging area right on the center of the screen, you can see that there's like a three-dimensional axis kind of following my face at all times. So now I'm going to go back to the Scenes panel, and I'm going to add another object. And this time I'm going to add a face mesh. And when I insert that, something pretty dramatic is going to happen to my face on the preview window. And that's going to look like this. So basically you can see that a checkerboard pattern is covering my entire face. And the black and white boxes are supposed to represent that no textures or graphics are actually present on top of me. So I'm going to actually go ahead and just rename the face mesh to face paint color for the sake of organization. And then with the face paste color selected, in our scene, you can kind of see that some new settings have appeared on the right side of Spark AR. I'm going to now click on the plus icon that's next to materials. And that's going to overlay a very kind of simple, bland white texture on top of my face. Now you can also see that material has also appeared on the assets panel. And then I'm also going to double click that and then rename that as well. Now we have to link this material to the actual graphic that we want to use. So I'm going to select face paint color material on the assets panel. And then going over to the settings panel, I'm going to click on this box that's next to texture. And then I'm going to select face paint color. And with that, we can finally see the graphic that we've created being overlaid on top of us. Now, if the lighting of this graphic looks a little bit odd, you can always go to shader type, and then you can always do flat if you want to kind of preserve the vibrancy of the colors, or you can do face paint. That's going to resemble more or simulate a face paint just a little bit better. Now I'm going to basically repeat the entire process that I showed you to bring in the gray scale version of our facial graphic. So I'm going to do basically the same steps again. Add object, do face mesh. Now when you do this, obviously something very weird has happened because the face mesh that I just created is not following my face. And that's because the face mesh is not a child of the face tracker that I just created here. And you can tell that it's not aligned to this face paint here. So to correct this, I'm just going to click and drag and then drop it on face tracker. And with that, the face mesh is now following my face. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this face paint gray. And then I'm going to create a new material for this new face mesh. Create new material. And then a new material has emerged on our assets panel. I'm going to rename that. And then I'm going to go to texture of face paint gray. And then I'm going to select face paint gray. And then now the gray face paint is now being applied. And I'm just going to change the shader type to face paint. So the color is look a little bit more on point of how I intended it to be. So why did I actually bring in both a color version and a gray version of my face paint? Well, all of this is just to kind of set us up to the next lesson, which is to introduce some level of interactivity using Spark AR. Now, when we select the face tracker component in our scenes panel, we can see that on the settings panel, there's this little section called interactions patch. Now let's click on the create button. And then from there, we see a list of user actions that Spark AR can recognize. So basically the plan here is that I'm going to select a specific user action, say for example, head nod. So that basically means is that whenever I do a head nod, that the face paint is going to switch from the grayscale version to the color version, and then it keeps switching whenever I nod my head. So that's basically what I want to do. So I'm going to select head nod, and you can kind of see now that there's a new section that has been added to Spark AR, which is the patch editor. Now, the patch editor is basically what sets Spark AR apart from any other augmented reality software. And the patch editor is basically kind of like Spark AR's programming environment. Now, it's not programming in the sense where you have to do some hard coding like you do in JavaScript, processing, or Python. But this is kind of more of a visual programming framework where you have these little boxes that we call patches. And each patch does a very specific function. And then you can kind of see that all the patches are connected together. So it's the logic in which all these patches are connected together that we can form the algorithm of our program. So right now, these patches are already been kind of placed here. That has the face finder, face select, face tracker, and then head nod. So all of this is to set up is that basically Spark AR is now going to look for whenever I nod my head, and whenever it detects that I've nodded my head, then it's going to execute some other action that I'm going to put in right now. So to do that, let's select face paint gray from our scenes panel. And then when you do that, let's look at the settings panel again. Now, every settings panel have like a specific set of attributes that you can adjust, but there are some attributes that have this little arrow icon next to them. So whenever you see an arrow icon, that basically means that you can actually bring that attribute to the patch editor that you can manipulate through this programming environment. So we're going to keep things very simple for now, and then I'm going to click on the arrow next to visible. So when I click on that, then the attribute for visible for face paint gray has appeared. And now that all I'm going to do is that I'm going to connect the head nod to the face paint gray, and that's going to bring in something else, which is called the switch patch. So basically now we set ourselves up so that whenever I nod my head, it is going to change it from color to gray. And then I'll switch it back up whenever I nod my head again. So this is basically Spark AR in its most simple terms to set up a facial filter there. Now, obviously, we can definitely get more creative and complicated here, but this is hopefully will give you a nice quick introduction on how to use Spark AR. And usually when you want to do a software demo or to introduce Spark AR into your classrooms, usually this is kind of a good starting point to acquaint Spark AR to your students, because most students should be pretty familiar with facial filters from Instagram and Snapchat. So this is kind of a nice way to do some classroom activities. So now we're going to move on to the second part of our workshop here, and that is to do some fixed plane tracking. So I'm going to create a new file. And then from there, we're not going to do a facial filter. So basically, we don't need to see ourselves or anyone else for that matter in this preview area. So I'm going to go to add object this time. And then instead of a face tracker, I'm going to add a fixed target tracker. And I'm going to insert that. Now, and when you do that, you can see that things have dramatically changed here. But basically, all of this is just setting us up to do some image recognition to activate a very specific AR feature. You'll see in the preview area that we have a checkerboard pattern that looks pretty similar to the face mesh pattern that we saw in the previous lesson. And whenever we see this checkerboard pattern, that basically means that we need to actually insert some kind of image or texture into this area. Now to do this, I'm going to go to the Assets panel and then click Import from Computer. And then from there, I'm going to select this image that has the letter A in red. I open that. And then I'm going to go back to the Fixed Target Tracker into our scene. And then in its texture attribute, I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to click on our red letter A. And you can see that a letter has now appeared in our preview area. So basically what we've done is that we've set up Spark AR so that it's constantly looking for this specific image. And the goal that we want to do for this lesson is that once Spark AR finds this image through its camera, then it's going to play an animated sequence right on top of this. Now, when you want to play animations in Spark AR, there are two main ways to do this. The first way is to import a pre-made animation that you created in a different program. Or the second option is to create the animated effect on Spark AR itself. So let's just quickly go through those two options, starting with the first option, which is importing a pre-made animation. So with that, I am gonna head on over to After Effects, where I've already made this very simple animated sequence, just the letters B and C slowly fading in, nothing impressive at all. And with this completed animation, I am going to add it to the render queue. Now, for those of you who are well versed in After Effects, this should be a very easy review for you. So for the output module, I'm going to click on the word lossless. And in the format, instead of QuickTime, I'm going to select a PNG sequence. And then for the channels, I'm going to select RGB plus alpha. And the reason that I'm adding this alpha here is because I do not want this white background to come with the animated sequence, because I want this white background to be transparent. So I'm going to click OK. And I'm just going to click on this just to see where my files are headed. And that location is fine. And then now I'm going to hit render and wait for After Effects to put out all my image sequences. Okay, and once that's done, let's take a quick peek at those files. And as you can see that rather than exporting an actual video file, After Effects has imported all the frames that's involved in the animated sequence. And the reason why we did this is because Spark AR does not recognize video files currently. And the only way to bring in animated sequences is through an image sequence just like this. So now let's go back to Spark AR, and now let's import those image sequence. So in the Assets panel, I'm going to click on Add Asset, click on Animated Sequence. I'm going to just rename this ABC from AE. And with this selected, I'm going to go to its Settings panel, and in the Textures attribute, I'm going to click that, select New Image Texture. Then from there, I'm going to find all my image sequences. And then I'm going to select all of the frames that we just created. Click Open. And basically, Spark AR is going to take some time to process and load all of those images to the program. And again, depending on the sizes of each file and the amount of files that you're trying to import, this may take quite a bit. And as this is loading, I should say that even though there's some waiting involved, but if you're well versed with After Effects or any other third-party animation software, then this approach should be the more intuitive way to go to bring in animated sequences, as opposed to creating the animation itself on Spark AR. Let's just check to see. Nope, it's still going. Importing, it's taking some time to import everything here. Okay, so now that I know that all the images have been loaded by seeing the file name and all the ranges being displayed here, now I'm going to go back to the Scenes panel, and then I'm going to add a new object. I'm going to select Plane this time. And you can see that a new plane, an empty plane, has appeared. Now I'm going to take this little animated sequence and link it to the plane that I just created here. So to do this, I'm going to give this new plane a new material 0 here, and rename this. And I think I should also rename this as well. So selecting the ABC material again, I'm going to go to Texture, and then link our animated sequence, ABC, from After Effects. And you can see that animated sequence is playing right in our preview area. Now we can kind of zoom in and out by scrolling up and down using our mouse. We can also rotate around the camera by holding the Command key and then just clicking and dragging. Now when you do this, you'll notice that there's this little gray box around our animated sequence, which we do not need. So to do that, I'm gonna go down and then see this little area called Alpha Test. I'm going to click on that, and then that has gotten rid of the gray boxes for the most part, but you can kind of see some residue of that gray area appearing on the edges of our letter. To fix that, I'm going to take the cutoff and just increase that so that it just slowly trims off the edges that we do not need. And that looks just about right. Now another problem that we're facing is that we want this image sequence to be aligned with this little A here, because right now the distance, there's quite a bit of distance between them. So to fix that, I'm going to take my plane that I created, the ABC, and I'm going to drag that, and I'm going to drop it onto the fixed target tracker. And then you'll now see that they are right on top of one another. Now the second problem that we have is that the letters proportions are very different, right? So this A looks very different than this A, even though they're basically the same typefaces. And for those of you who can't tell already, I'm just using Helvetica Bold. Now this is another problem with Spark AR, is that whenever you import an animated sequence, it usually comes out where the scale is not exactly what you wanted. So that means you're going to have to actually resize the thing yourself. So to do that, I'm going to click on this little Edit Scale tool, and I'm going to use these arrows here to adjust both the vertical and horizontal separately. Likewise, you can also click on this little blue square if you want to do a more proportional fix. Okay. Now I'm going to use the direction tool by clicking on that, and I'm going to use the arrow axis again to have them aligned a little bit more. Switch back to the scale tool. Obviously, this is taking quite a bit. Okay, and I think that's good enough. Now, even though that it's not a perfect match, but for the sake of time, I'll just leave it there. In reality, of course, I'll spend just a few more minutes trying to get that match completely perfect. Okay, now that we've done that, I'm just going to rotate around so that we can see the actual animated sequence in its entirety. And actually, we are done here. So now that we can actually preview this on our phones, now to do that, you're going to have to take your smartphone and download the Spark AR app beforehand. And once you do that, you can actually connect your phone to your computer via USB. And then once the computer recognizes the connection, you'll notice that in this icon, there's this little blue circle. And basically, this is the button that you're going to click to actually sync up the phone app with the desktop app here. So when I click on that, it'll say send to connected device. So basically, when you hit send, it's basically going to transfer all that you've been working on to your smartphone there. And from the smartphone, that is where you can actually preview exactly how your augmented reality experience would look like. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention here is that our animated sequence is actually playing on a loop. Now, if you don't want that, if you want the video to stop at its last frame, you simply go to the animated sequence in our assets panel, and you can just simply uncheck the loop box, and that would be the solution. So that is it for the first option into bringing animated sequence into an augmented reality experience. Now let's try the second approach, which is instead of importing an animated image sequence, we're going to animate things from Spark AR itself. So to do that, I'm actually going to create another new Spark AR working file here. And from here, I'm going to basically repeat much of the steps that I've just done, which is adding a fixed plane tracker, and then adding a target image. Basically, I'm going to use the same one, the red letter. Link that to our fixed target tracker. And then now I'm going to add a plane. Put that into as a child of the fixed target tracker. And then I'm also going to add another asset. Import from computer. And this time I'm going to add this image here, as well as one more image, and that is the yellow image, which are basically the same letter and same size, but they're in outlines and in different colors there. Basically, what I want to do now is to create an animated sequence where when Spark AR recognizes our target image, then these little outline layers would actually slowly rise up from our plane. So to do that, we've created our first plane that I'm going to rename as orange. Add another plane. Put that as a child of the fixed target tracker. Rename that as yellow. So I'm going to now link these two images into our planes. So I'm going to start with the orange plane. Add a new material. Give that a name. And then give that the texture of orange. And then I'm going to go to yellow. Also give that a new material. And pretty much doing the same thing. And now you can see that all of our images have been imported. And just like the previous example, all of these scales are totally not what I wanted. So basically, I'm going to have to go and adjust the sizes of those planes. So let's just go ahead and quickly do that. I'm going to select both of them so that I can scale them at the same time. This one's going to be a little bit easier because everything is already centered. And that should look just about right. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to spend too much time trying to perfect all of this. Now what I'm going to do is that now I'm going to go to the fixed target tracker, and then I'm going to go to interactions and then click create. And once I do that, it's going to open up the patch editor. So basically now we're seeing the patches that set up the conditions of once the image is recognized through our camera, then something is going to happen. And that something that we're going to do is that animated sequence of these outlined letters slowly rising from the plane. So to do that, we're going to add a new patch. We're going to select animation, add patch, and then we're going to add another patch, transition. And then we're going to add the orange plane. And then we're going to animate its position here. So we're going to click this yellow arrow icon next to position. And the position attribute for our orange plane has appeared. And then from there, we can now start to connect these patches together. So with the found one, I'm going to connect it to the play, and that has creates another patch called pulse. And basically it just turns it on and off. And then from there, I'm going to connect progress for animation into the progress for transition. And then in the transition, I'm going to connect that to our orange position attribute. Now from here, we can kind of see there's a start and end to the transition. So this is basically the starting coordinates, and the end is the ending coordinates. So you can think of it as like keyframes here, right? This is the starting keyframe, and then this is the ending keyframe. But because we want something to just kind of rise right above our first letter, I'm just going to change all of this, both X and Y coordinates for the final to be the same as our initial coordinates, because we don't want any of those animations happening. But for the Z, we definitely want that to rise above, but not too much. So I'm going to just put it as 0.2. And that should be just enough for what I want to do. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is that I also want the orange plane to also rise above. Now to do that, I'm going to add another animation. Basically, I just double clicked it on any empty spot in the patch editor. And then another transition. And then I'm going to take the yellow, select the yellow plane in our scene. And then I'm going to click on the yellow arrow icon for position. And that brings up that attribute to the patch editor. And then basically I'm just going to do the same thing, which is connecting everything the exact same way that we did for the orange plane. And then I'm going to just adjust these coordinates again, like so. So now everything has been done. Again, we're just doing a very simple animated sequence, but basically it's just introducing an animation patch, which just basically serves as the kind of the controls for playing, reversing, and resetting our animation. And then there's also the transition, which basically specifies the nature of our animation, or specifically keyframes. And then finally, we have the actual object itself that we are animating. Now we can also try to put in pulse to reverse. And that just basically have the animation to play in reverse whenever our camera doesn't recognize the image or goes off the our fixed target there. So not entirely necessary, but just for the sake of completeness, I just kind of put it there. And then once we've done that, we can also just kind of test it on our device, similar to the way that we've done it with the previous animated sequence, and everything should look just fine. Going back to our patch editor, I do want to point out a few more things. The first thing is the duration inside our animation patch. Right now it's set to 1, meaning 1 second. So this entire sequence will play out in exactly 1 second. So you can always adjust this number if you want to slow things down or speed things up. Over here in the transition patch, there's our curve settings here, which basically controls the acceleration of our animation. And when you open that up, you can kind of see that there's a lot of different options out here, which seems a little bit unusual, especially if you're comfortable with using After Effects, where they only offer ease, ease in, ease out, some of the more standard ease settings. But this one offers a lot more. Now, one thing that's actually missing here is that it doesn't give you the abilities to adjust the curves manually, the graph editor in After Effects. So that's one limitation that Spark AR has, is that if you're really a details-oriented person or a perfectionist when it comes to motion graphics, you'll definitely find this option to be just a little bit limiting. Now, one other thing I want to point out here is that so far we've created an animated sequence of just 2 keyframes. There's the starting keyframe and then there's the ending keyframe. Basically, we just created a one-time animation. But what if we want to have a sequence of animated effects? For example, with this, once this A comes up, then I want it to move to the side a little bit. So what if I have that 2-stage animation that I want to implement? How does that actually work inside the patch editor? Well, the solution is actually not that complicated. It's just basically creating other animation and transition patches and just linking them up together. So let's go ahead and actually do that. So for these orange and yellow A's, once they come up, I want the yellow A to move to the left, and then I want the orange A to move to the right. So let's just start with the yellow letter here. So as I said earlier, it's just a matter of adding more animation and transition patches. Do that right here. Now for the transition patch for our second sequence, since we're only dealing with the letter A moving to the left, we're only dealing with the x-axis motion. So I can set the y and the z to 0. And since we're moving to the left, I'm going to put in negative 0.2. And then from there, I can just connect the animation with the transition patches. And then from here, I'm going to go back to the first animation patch. And you can kind of see that there's another kind of this little thing here called completed. I'm going to take that and I'm going to drag a wire and then connect it to the play in this our second animation patch. So basically what I did here is that I'm telling Spark AR that once this first animation sequence has been completed, then I want it to play the second animated sequence, which is right here. Now, going back to here, one might guess that the only thing that's left to do is to take this little wire and then connect it to the yellow patch. Well, actually, Spark AR wouldn't allow us to do that, because when you do it, it just basically switches the connection from this transition patch to this transition patch. So basically, we can only have one connection going into this patch here. So to actually solve that issue, I'm going to actually delete this, and then I'm going to add a new patch. I'm going to double click and then search for add. And the add patch is basically doing what it says, the label does, which is adding values from 2 different sources. So I'm going to take the transition patch from the first one, and then the second transition patch, and then I'm going to connect them together. And then finally, I'm going to connect the add to the yellow patch here. So basically what I did here is that once the first animation plays, that gets updated, But once this gets done, then the second animation gets played. But once the second animation gets played, it's going to get added into the whole thing there. So it's just basically just adding this value with this value that we see down here. And then that eventually gets updated in the yellow patch. So I'm going to also do the same thing with the orange letter. And that's basically the same thing what I just showed you here. So I'm going to just quickly go and create an animation patch and a transition patch. Since I want the orange letter to move to the right, I'm going to label the x coordinate, the n key coordinate to be 0.2, and the rest should be 0. And connect them exactly similar to how I did it before. I'm going to delete this connection here. I'm going to add another add patch. Connect these two together. And then I'm finally done here. Now let's see how this thing actually looks in our devices. So now I'm going to export this whole thing into my phone. And once that's completed, instead of testing it out in a printed sheet, I'm going to test it directly on the computer screen, which is a perfect valid way of doing it. And as you can see, everything is working just fine. And that wraps up our Spark AR demonstration. Hopefully you found this to be informative and interesting. And I really wish I had a live audience here with me so that we can have a Q&A section and to have a conversation of what your impressions were about Spark AR, to talk about its pros and cons from your perspective, and maybe even open up to a broader discussion on some of the challenges, opportunities, assumptions, and issues surrounding augmented reality and immersive technologies in general. So if you have any questions on how to use Spark AR, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. But if you are a professor who's actually engaged in scholarship regarding augmented reality or mixed reality or any other immersive technologies, I would love to connect with you to know a little bit more about some of the projects that you're working and the questions that you're trying to address with the scholarship that you're working on. Because with augmented reality, we know that this is a technology that's been around for quite some time, but the tools to generate AR experiences have become a lot more accessible, specifically for those outside of kind of engineering and computer science. And that really opens up a lot of opportunities of what graphic designers can do with Spark AR. With this tool, I think it becomes a lot easier for us to generate augmented reality, to experiment with voice-based or motion-based user interfaces that can be applicable for user groups with limited motor skills. We can use Spark AR to do some prototyping for wayfinding and signage to see what its scale would look like through AR. Even before doing some more physical mock-ups that, depending on the signage and wayfinding, can get a little bit costly. And on maybe even a formal level, I think that augmented reality can open up some really interesting creative opportunities in bringing motion graphics and kinetic typography into the interactive medium that blends together two-dimensional, three-dimensional spaces, as well as digital and physical environments. So if you'd love to talk more about some of these opportunities, I would love to kind of connect with you. My information is right up on the screen here right now. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully everyone is staying safe. Thank you so much.